So then came after all of this, large wood was recruited from the burn back in the 1800s. And then all of the logging took place. Most of the Coast Range was pretty tapped out for private land timber anyway by about 1957. And then 1964, we had a very large flood event in western Oregon, and it brought tremendous amount of woody debris from landslides down into all the coastal streams. Major amount of material recruited all at once. It was sitting up on the hill slopes and in all of the stream channels waiting to come, waiting for the big event. 1964 brought it all into the channel. And then a big mistake was made between the 60s and the 70s by agencies, fish biologists. Go ahead, man. They decided that all that material in the stream channel was blocking fish passage. And so there was a decade of contracts let for anybody that had a machine to go out and remove all of that woody debris from the stream channels, and it was a coast-wide effort. And major amounts of wood that was only going to be recruited from that big burn in the late 1800s was lost to the system during that decade. Not to mention all the woody debris and the complexity that came from the hill slope failures. And just to be a little bit fair, I think there were some significant changes in fish's access to their historical spawning gravels. So there were a lot of jams after the '64 flood, and folks thought that what they were doing was a good thing. But they just got so rabid about doing it that they cleaned all the wood out, and our systems are really starved to this day because of the activities that took place there. Okay.
Steve, that didn't really happen here on the
Which part?
the removing of the material.
It was already gone?
Yeah, it hasn't been here at all. I remember the '64 flood. And
It didn't hang up in no jams.
and there wasn't much logging until later, anyway. Most of these hills were burned by the homesteaders and burned, and most of this timber didn't start growing until the 30s and 40s.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so it's pretty young standing trees in this valley.
One thing that's pretty interesting about this progression of activities in the coast is that this is a graph that, and we looked at this last time, but it shows the naturally produced coho on the whole Oregon coast. The yellow is that portion of the run that was harvested. But you can see that there was a major change at about 1976 there, where huge populations, up to 500,000 and more, just totally crashed about 1976. It happens to be just about the same time that all of the wood was removed from Coast Range streams, and all that complexity that was the foundation for habitat, for their habitat in fresh water, for trapping the gravels that they're spawning in and providing winter refuge. And that single event, the combination of the '64 flood and the activities that took place after that, were primary reason the Oregon coast populations collapsed. There were other reasons. It was also the same time that the hatchery programs came online, and it's a complicated issue, but it's quite interesting that the collapse happened in the late '70s. Okay. So the complexity that I'm always talking about is really just the concept of storage. It's storing nutrients for that food web in fresh water. It's storing gravel for spawning and for species richness. Lots of different insects live in gravel. And it's storing wood for structure and for retaining that material, and storing water into the summertime. And again, it's really all, in streams, is all about managing budgets. And if you have no way to store it, it's just swept to the ocean. Okay. And we had talked last time about the two things that really create this kind of storage and complexity, and it's the full spanning wood that we're talking about, and it was also, we spent a fair amount of time talking about beaver habitat and beaver doing that similar job. Okay. By building dams and storing sediments and keeping that material that was headed for the ocean stored up in the basin for future use. Okay. Without large wood, without beaver, are on the major decline. We talked about that last time and talked about some of the data that's been collected. Without those two things, this is what stream channels do. They just dig straight down, and they incise themselves and are totally isolated from their historical floodplain. And they'll continue digging until they reach bedrock, and that's basically the state of the main stem, the Aquina, in most places right now. It is scoured to bedrock. Okay. Well, this is just a comparative slide of a stream that had torrented. This is Resurrection Creek. It's actually in Alaska. And the top is an aerial photo. Top slide up here shows this section stream that's just really simple. It's all riffle and rapid habitat, no pool complexity. Really isn't providing any habitat for salmonids. And this was after, this lower piece was after the river was rebuilt with log structures to boost the sinuosity, which is the pattern that the stream takes across its floodplain. And it's the wood that's deflecting water from one side to the next. And here you can see there's, or if you can see it at all, I don't know, it's probably pretty bad, but you know, there's sections of riffle and sections of pool, riffle, pool. A lot more complex. This was the result of a restoration project. Okay. And the sinuosity in and of itself is providing some of the complexity for fish. When we're doing our snorkel inventory work in the wintertime, wherever there's a log that's deflecting, behind the log it's creating an eddy. And where there's an eddy, there's an accumulation of debris in a little pocket like this. And that's where all of the fish in this entire pool will be, is in that eddy where the debris is accumulating. It's the one small piece of habitat that they can persist in. They don't, this is a summer photo with these fish distributed through the pool. In the winter, they'd be all concentrated in this one little slow eddy. Okay. The other thing large wood is doing is it's creating, like the photo we saw, it's creating that sinuosity. It's taking a straight channel and starting to deflect it right or left, moving it horizontally. And that's really the process that streams need to be going through to be contributing, naturally contributing wood into the channel on its own, and not depending on, you know, snags from fires and landslide failures. Okay, Wayne? So it deflects, eats against a bank, undercuts a streamside tree, which then recruits into the channel, which starts this domino effect of moving the channel off to the other side. That's a healthy stream, is to see some erosion going on like this. And next slide. Here's a situation where there's no, as the stream's moving, there's nothing to hold the bank. There's no mat complexity, root mat complexity. If you'd go back one slide just so we can compare how dense the root structure is here that's protecting this bank as it's slowly eroding underneath it. It'll take years for that tree, which is so tenacious, to actually fall into the stream. Without that tree, it looks like the next slide, which is moving very rapidly. And yes, it's tipping trees in, but the trees are all young plantation, and they don't provide any significant complexity to the stream. So we're accelerating this kind of erosion by not having a real significant root mat complexity in the riparian. And I think that's why, one of the things, most important things for restoration activities and what watershed councils are trying to do is plant trees along streams. This is really what it's all about, is providing that root mat complexity and providing future potential for the stream, as well as shade. Okay. The whole idea of streams migrating left and right horizontally is all about also not only collecting wood from the riparian, but collecting gravel. There's often very rich gravel lenses deposited in the floodplain, and that stream, as it's moving horizontally, is bringing those gravels back into the channel, cleaning them and sorting them for spawning. Okay. So this is a large wood project that was placed with a helicopter. It's an attempt to try and get some complexity back in the channel and to...
Where is it?
This was in Green River in the Alsea Basin. You can see some of on the right there, it's a bunch of fines and sediment depositing there, which may not have been depositing without that structure. So it's storing some material. Okay, this is another much, much older structure site and also in the Alsea Basin. Okay. This is a structure on the South Fork of the Alsea and where I live, and trapping a lot of debris on the outside of a corner, just creating a real complex off-channel habitat behind that structure that's protected from the winter flows. Okay.
Wow.
This is a structure site on Woods Creek on the Marys River Basin, and it's accumulating the type of wood that's really the only type of wood that's really coming into a stream anymore, which is young alder, senescing alder, which alder die from the top down, and little pieces will break off. The tree doesn't actually fall into the stream, it just breaks off in 6 or 8 foot chunks from the top down, and these structures are collecting that material instead of flushing it, letting it flush to the ocean. So it's a nutrient base. That garbage there will begin to collect leaves and detritus and then spawning gravels, and it'll mature with time. Okay? Once it has matured, it does start to collect spawning gravels, and then you get all kinds of really complex channel braiding that is associated with wood placements. And those channels provide lots of different sizes of gravels. It'll sort them in different, you can kind of see that a little bit here. There's some small gravels over on the right and some larger cobbles up by the island. And it's that sorting that the salmon are looking for. They're looking for just the right size in just the right location. Okay? The whole process of putting wood in then starts a chain reaction of events. This particular log is a log that was placed, a structure log that was placed, and the tip of it was creating scour during high flows, which undercut this alder, and it fell in. Once it fell in, it started a whole chain of events that kind of leads to the next slide, which looks like this. And so a little investment of that initial conifer wood that was put in the stream starts this stream on a trajectory of its own that just leads us to much better, higher quality habitat for salmonids.